and I'll just talk about a few ground rules, and then I'll start pulling names out of the hat. So I'm going to randomly pull 3 names, and I'll call your name and ask you to come to the microphone and ask a question. Although I love the spotlight and love the microphone, and I know some of you are like me, I'm going to ask you to keep your comments to a minimum and get to your question. So if you want to lecture the senator, you can do that later. But there's so many of you. He said you can do it now. But there's so many of you with so little time. I want to make sure we get to as many questions as possible. And when you come to the microphone, be sure to introduce yourself. Does that sound fair? Okay. Let's get going.
No, I just want to thank all of you for being here tonight. What an amazing, look at the turnout tonight in this place. I haven't, in the 8 years that I've been in this job, we'll talk about a lot of this tonight, I'm sure, but I am as optimistic as I have ever been about the fate of this republic and where we're headed. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that I have heard so much from the people that I represent in the last 3 or 4 months, and this town hall is emblematic of that. I tend not to read a lot of social media, except for yours. And this morning, Susan started the day by saying, "Oh, I read this thing on Facebook." Do not. I have 3 town halls today. No, Susan is here tonight. Don't tell me what somebody said. What somebody has said is, well, of course he's going to Boulder and Denver. That's easy for him to do. And first of all, anybody who spent any time representing Boulder or Denver knows that it is not easy to do. And second, this is not the first set of town halls that I've done in this recent incarnation. In fact, I started my town halls this time in mostly Republican parts of the state. In El Paso County, in Colorado Springs is where I had the first one. And then we went to Pueblo, and then to Alamosa, Durango, and then through Delta, where I visited the hospital. We didn't actually have a town hall there, and then one in Grand Junction. And we've run them all the same way, which is we're not screening anybody's questions. And I invite you to ask whatever question you want and bring whatever criticism you want. I want to have as candid a conversation as we possibly can have. I'm not going to give you any speech longer than I just gave you because I really want to spend the time taking as many questions or feedback or thoughts that people have. And I've had a wonderful time in these meetings. It hasn't always been easy, but it's been enlightening. And I'm also delighted to know that this is the last of these I have to do today. And I'm going to go have dinner with some friends and my kids. So Nate, let's give Nate a round of applause for doing it. I also want to say that we're sitting in a place that really is so important in the history of Denver and the history of this community. Susan, our first house was at 23rd and Elm Street in Park Hill, so we know how important Montview has been over the years. And I've been here as the school superintendent and as a senator, and when we were looking for a place to do this, and we were turned down everywhere, Montview Presbyterian Church once again said, we're happy to have that here. So let's give them a round of applause.
If I can do this without making that wonderful noise. Jan Tapey, you're first up. You have a question on healthcare? Here she comes. All right.
I'm a retired public health nurse practitioner for a year career. I'm really scared about the bill because it's wolf in sheep's clothing, the Republican bill, and I'd really like to ask how you plan to preserve Medicaid, especially the expansion. It's been a life and death matter for a lot of people that I've seen.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for what you do, and I totally agree. Look, I've spent 8 years of my life traveling around our state, and a lot of that has been having conversations with people about health care. And a number of those meetings have been people blowing me up for having voted for the Affordable Care Act over and over again. And some of the criticisms that people had, I think, were legitimate, and some not so legitimate. What I can tell you about this bill from the House of Representatives is that if you set out to design a piece of legislation less responsive to the needs of Colorado, you couldn't do it than this bill. And I mean including the people who have blown me up in these meetings for having voted for Obamacare. Because think about it, even before I get to Medicaid, and I will, one of the reasonable complaints I think about the Affordable Care Act is I've heard from people like people in Routt County who said to me, you know what, Michael, we have no competition for insurance. This is one of the most important, expensive places in America to buy health insurance. You're forcing us to buy it as part of the Affordable Care Act. I don't qualify for the subsidies in the Affordable Care Act because I'm making enough money, so I don't. But I'm paying a lot for insurance because we don't have competition. And my deductible is so high that when I actually need the insurance, it's useless to my family. Why are you forcing me to do that? That seems to me to be a really legitimate critique. And we should be working as Republicans and Democrats to try to fix that problem. The House bill only makes that worse. I don't think the House bill can fairly be described as a health care bill. I think the House bill is first and foremost a tax cut for the wealthiest Americans and for the insurance companies. And by the way, nobody in Colorado has asked me to cut those taxes on them, including the wealthy people whose taxes they are. That's not a priority for them when it comes to health care. And then the other piece, which you point out, which is so critical, is Medicaid. This is an $880 billion cut in Medicaid. That's how they're paying for the tax cuts for these richest Americans. And they say, well, we should do that because there are all these people that are getting Medicaid that aren't working. And they're lazy people. And they shouldn't have Medicaid. They apparently don't understand who's on Medicaid in this country. First of all, this is not a small cut in Medicaid. This is a quarter of the Medicaid program in the United States. And second, just taking Colorado, 51% of the people on Medicaid in this state are children. Are they supposed to go to work for the privilege of having health care, or do we want them in school? The next category of people on Medicaid are families who have spent down their life savings for the privilege of being in a nursing home paid for by Medicaid. Are they supposed to go to work? And then there's a whole category of people that are working at places like Walmart who are not paid enough to be able to buy private insurance. And so they're on Medicaid. They're already working. Are they supposed to work 80 hours instead of 40 hours? The percentage of people that Paul Ryan and these guys are concerned about is infinitesimal. And we should have a discussion about that. If there are people who are malingerers who shouldn't be on Medicaid, let's talk about that. But you don't cut a quarter of the program. You don't throw off all of Colorado's poor children in the name of trying to solve a problem that's not actually there. And finally, let me say this. In terms of fiscal responsibility, which they're claiming they're doing, that's not what they're doing. What they're doing is shifting the burden of maintaining health care for the people that I just described from the federal government to states and local governments. Unless our decision is going to be that poor kids are just not going to get health care anymore, we're going to empty out nursing homes. So we have to stop this House in the this bill in the United States Senate. That's what we have to do. And I hope on the other side, I was in a room back there in Washington. I'll stop here, Nate. I apologize. I was in a room the day, but I know health care is on a lot of people's mind. I was in a room with some people, some senators, Republicans and Democrats, when there was that day, and it was really uncertain whether Paul Ryan was going to be able to pass the bill through the House a second time. Remember, he had it the first time, and then only when they made it even worse were they then able to get it through the House the second time. And I can tell you the Republican senators were yelling at the television saying, please don't pass that bill, please don't pass that bill, because they know how bad it is and they don't want to deal with it on the Senate. And my hope is that at some point we can get Democrats and Republicans to work together to help solve the gaps that really do exist, deal with transparency, deal with the ridiculous cost of drugs in this country, deal with the predictability, and make sure that people have access to medicine without having to make the kind of choices that I hear about in letters every single day in my office, that people in no other industrialized country in the world are having to make, the sacrifices they're having to make for themselves or for their kids, just to have basic health care. That shouldn't be the way it is in the United States, and we're not going to let that bill pass.
Okay. Is
that how it works? It's going to be a long evening. There you go. All right. I'll stand over here.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Oh, that sounds great. All right, so let's call up three. First, before I do that, if people who are sitting can stand up and squeeze in, so some of these folks on the edge can sit down, get to know each other. Why not? Stay warm. Thank you for doing that. Really appreciate it. And if some of you standing want to sit, please go ahead and do that. And while you're shuffling around, if we can have Eric, Derlin, Marion Lawrence, and David Engel come to the microphone for your questions. There's more space up here, I'm hearing, if you want to sit. One up front. I used some breath mints, so it'll be okay. All right. Please, sir.
I'm a member of the Social Justice Committee here at Montview, and we've been working on healthcare issues for many years, and I am hopeful that the Senate Republicans, and especially if they are willing to accept some Democratic help, can really do a much better job of coming up with a real healthcare bill. And I know that Senator Gardner is one of the 13 white males on the Republican committee working on something, and I wonder if you have some access to Senator Gardner, that he might be open to some ideas. I also know that Susan Collins and Senator Cassidy are working on an alternate bill, and they've used language like fixing the ACA, which is very promising. Is that another avenue that's possible?
So absolutely. I think Susan Collins and our colleague from Louisiana have some really interesting ideas in their bill. And they haven't had, they basically have said, look, if you're gonna repeal Obamacare, which is what has been said before, you better have something that's as good as what you're repealing. And President Trump promised that. President Trump said, you're going to love it, to short circuit. It's going to be excellent. It's going to be awesome. Yeah, everybody who's covered is going to be covered. It's going to be really, really cheap. And read the articles. Don't listen to the fake news. There's an article today in the Los Angeles Times about insurance companies having to raise their rates by 20%, not because of what the Affordable Care Act is doing, but because of the uncertainty that's being created by the House of Representatives and by Donald Trump and his administration. Susan Collins is one of the best people we have. I think she's completely genuine in her efforts to try to fix this. And I do have a good relationship with Cory Gardner, and we do talk about these things from time to time. I don't want to speak for him here, but I think that he thinks there are some significant limitations in the House bill. In fact, he was one of 4 Republicans who sent a letter to McConnell saying that the Medicaid cuts in the health care bill were something he didn't want to pursue. So there's a step forward. Thank you.
My name is David Engel. Whoa. I'm 23 years old. I'm a student at CU Denver. I'm an EMT. I wanted to ask you a specific question, but there are just so many things right now. I want to go bigger with it. What do you think about the state of the Democratic Party?
It's a great question. So I would say that for years I've said in meetings like this and smaller meetings than this, and in my caucus meetings in Washington when I'm meeting with other Democrats, that I really believe strongly that Washington had decoupled from the American people. And that the set of priorities that were being pursued in Washington were not America's priorities and were not Colorado's priorities. That people were engaged in something that had something to do with Washington, but not much to do with people at home. And I would never have predicted, nor would I have ever recommended, nor would I recommend it today, that the remedy for that should have been electing Donald Trump as President of the United States. But I can understand it because we've gotten to a place in our politics, a sort of corrosiveness in it and a kind of feeling that government can't make a difference and that we're all going to be mad at each other in our political system rather than try to work together to build for the next generation, that it occurred to people that it might not be the end of the world to send an unqualified reality TV star to the White House. And we have to do better than that. And as those of us that are Democrats, and I make no assumption or presumption about anybody here and whatever party you're in, and those of you that are Democrats and Republicans should know that I do put, sometimes to the fury of people that I represent, my bipartisan record up against any other member of the Senate. If you look at what we've done over the last 8 years, whether it's immigration, whether it's education, whether it's work on the Food and Drug Administration, when other people have made excuses about why they can't work with somebody because they're in the other party, I have tried to do it because I think it's important to set an example that we can work together and that our focus is less on our partisan identity than it is on what we're doing as a country. Now, having said all that, I think the Democratic Party has some very fundamental rebuilding that we have to do. I don't think we had a message in the last presidential campaign that resonated with the American people, and especially working people in this country. And yeah, but he wasn't nominated, and he was not, well, you might think that, but in any event, I won't dispute the fact that Bernie had a message that a lot of people resonated with, and that was very authentic on a lot of levels. I won't dispute that. And I think one of the reasons why Bernie resonated with people is that he's authentic in a meaningful way, not in a like, oh yeah, I don't like most politicians, but he seems to say. Bernie hasn't changed his mind about a lot in 30 years. And Bernie knows what he believes, and he believes what he believes. I don't agree with everything that he says. We have a good relationship. But I do think we need leadership in our party to not appear as authentic as he is, but to be as authentic as he is. And one of the things we need to do, I'm not going to be specific about it, we'll talk about it when it comes up, education, higher education, the fact that people your age are carrying a ridiculous freight of student loans that nobody should have to carry. I mean, there's an agenda here, but here's what I would say, just on a very high level. And that is that, I can be persuaded differently, but for now, my assessment of Donald Trump is that he represents a historic and significant reactionary force in the history of American politics. That's what he is. That's what Making America Great Again is all about. That's the story he's talking about dragging us into the past when, things look different in the United States than they did today. And he's not focused on the future. He's never focused on the future. And what I would say about the Democrats is we cannot answer that reactionary politics with our own set of reactionary politics. We need a set of politics that's focused on and policies that are focused on the future, on the 21st century, on the next generation of Americans, and we're not going to find all of those answers in the 1960s or the 1950s. We got to look forward. So thank you for your question.
Thank you.
Come on up.
Okay, this is important if I'm getting up here.
I know, I can't believe it. I shouldn't have said that. We know each other.
Okay. So it's been called the Risk to Americans Act, the License to Kill Bill, the Filthy Food Act. The Regulatory Accountability Act would cripple federal response to current and future health and safety hazards in our food, environment, workplaces, consumer financial protections, can
you can count on a no vote from me. If I could vote twice, I would vote twice. Yes, thank you. I would say we did have one success last week, which was we were able to push back. You know, the president has been pushing all these, what it's called CRAs, Congressional Review Act things, which are not, for a variety of reasons, a really bad way to legislate. And he's been winning them all. And then the other day I went to visit an elementary school with my friend Antoine Wilson, who used to be the principal at Montbello High School, worked with me in the Denver Public School. You know Antoine. And he's now the chancellor of the DC Public Schools. So I went to see the school. We had this important vote. It was coming back. My staff was totally freaking out because they thought I was going to miss the vote. And I got there just in time to vote no on the overturning of the methane rule, which hilariously, after all the stress about whether I would make it there in time, when I voted no on C-SPAN, it said no, and then it said 51, because that was the 51st vote to beat the Trump administration on the methane. So naturally, we put that on Instagram. The opposite, it said no, 51, and then about 4 deep into the Instagram responses was Susan and my daughter Caroline, who wrote in, what your parents say when they're not going to buy you a car after you pass. So yes, I will vote no on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. So next up is Debbie James. Debbie, did you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, come on up. Randy Bowker and Nicholas Walker. Come on up.
Hi, Senator.
Hi.
When you voted against poor and lower middle class Americans being able to purchase reduced cost drugs from Canada, you hurt, harmed, and also possibly signed a death sentence for those who suffer from big pharma's stranglehold over their health care and well-being. I wonder where the empathy and compassion for the elderly and poor children and their parents who cannot afford essential medications. And a follow-up question is, will you vote for this? Can we count on your vote for it when it comes up again?
Thank you for the question. I really do think that it is vital for us to reduce the cost of drugs in this country. It is ridiculous what we pay, especially when you look at what other countries pay. And I also think it's ridiculous that for us to solve that problem, we have to imagine a world where people are buying drugs from another country whose regulatory regime would change overnight if that became the law in the United States. What I would much rather do instead is put Medicare in a position where they're required to negotiate drug prices on behalf of the American people. I think that would drive drug prices down, and I've had this conversation with Bernie. I spent time working with a Republican named Richard Burr to create a system. We had no system in America to track pharmaceuticals from the manufacturer to your medicine cabinet. I was surprised to learn that. It turns out that it was true. And when you buy a gallon of milk at the grocery store or the 7-Eleven, that has a barcode on it. If you drink it and you're sick, you then know where the milk came from. We know what place it was sold, and we know where the milk was. We have no such thing for drugs. Now we do, because of the work that Burr and I did, and they're implementing it. And when Bernie says on this subject, if you can import vegetables from Canada, you should be able to import drugs from Canada, the reality is there are a lot of drugs that are coming in from there in the imports that are not ever inspected by anybody. And I think that's a significant health risk. So my view is when he strengthens the bill to create the consumer protections that I think are necessary to make sure that my kids or parents are safe with the drugs that are coming in, then I would be willing to vote for it. In the meantime, what I'd like to do is have Medicare negotiate these drug prices, which I think would make a profound difference for people in our country.
Well, Senator, first of all, God bless your administration. We appreciate you.
Thanks for letting me come.
Wanted to speak on behalf of myself and veterans like me. I'm Nicholas Walker, a former Veteran Affairs Commissioner and chairman of the Economic Development Committee on that board. the Veterans Administration Hospital handling of that building project in Aurora is atrocious, but it is more than that. It's an embarrassment to the VA and to veterans service that it's billions of dollars over budget and years in delay in construction. Now, I'm wondering, we called to task in 2015 an accountability for that building project, and it's since gone completely silent. I mean, FBI investigation, the whole bit. But there is obviously some mishandling going on. So we need to get a response about what's happening with the building and construction and who's holding who accountable for all of those missteps.
Okay. Well, I will check on where the investigation is. It's only because of you and other veterans in the Rocky Mountain region, especially Colorado, that we finally got the attention of the VA on this project and the attention of the administration. I'm sad to say it was the previous administration, not this administration. This project was budgeted to cost $640 million. When it's finished, it's going to be $1.8 billion. That is totally unacceptable from the point of view of taxpayers, and it makes me mad because, among other things, it's terrible for our vets, but it also plays into the hands of people that want to oppose the government doing anything. If you say you're going to build something for 640 and it goes to 1.8, and I'm not usually this impolite, but I told the VA that I wouldn't hire the people they had running that project to build a fence in the backyard of my house.
That's right.
And that's true. And I wish that I could say, what did you say your name was, Mr.?
Nicholas.
Nicholas. I wish that I could say that I saw any evidence of criminal behavior. I haven't. What I've seen is just complete incompetence. And fortunately, the building is now about to be finished. We're almost done. And I think what we have to do now is make sure that it is filled with the equipment that's needed to run it, because there's some VA hospitals that have been open without the equipment needed to run it. And we need to make sure that our veterans are being served in an expeditious manner here and getting the health care they need here. And beyond the VA hospital, let me also say, we are doing a terrible job in rural Colorado of supporting our veterans. A lot of veterans live in rural Colorado. They have no access to health care that they need, access to mental health care that they need, access to addiction treatment that they need, and we should be doing a hell of a lot better job for, a heck of a lot better job for our veterans than we're doing. And veterans, unlike a lot of other things, there's not one more veteran than we have, or one fewer. And we know who they are, and we should be serving them a lot better. I'll tell you, Nicholas, and I'll stop here. I was standing in that VA hospital once, inside it, and it was just a shell at the time. And I looked over, I was with the VA people, I looked over, and there was the University of Colorado Hospital, and there was the Children's Hospital, both of which cost what they said they were going to cost to build, and both of which actually look like hospitals, which you may have noticed the new VA hospital does not. And I said to them, where in the world is there a hospital that looks like this hospital? And they said, nowhere in the world. And I said, why is it that we have a hospital that goes this long, has 8 buildings over this period of time? And their answer was, because that's how narrow the piece of land was that we were given to build. They had 3 other sites they could have built on it. So, I'll check and see where the investigation is. I will say this, we have stopped the VA from constructing any more hospitals, and now it's going to be built by people who actually know how to do it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Just
Sir, who was responsible for that?
For that, I believe that it was a responsibility that I would lodge at the Veterans Administration up to the level of the Secretary of the VA, and I'll be even more precise than that. I think General Shinseki, who did a wonderful job in the military and was very honest about a lot of things that were tough, did a lousy job managing this project and was completely unresponsive to the congressional delegation when we said to him, this is what we're hearing from the contractor. And not to put you, and I'll leave it there. But that's what it was, a failure of management.
But his name should be in the
let's get it open for our veterans.
Just want to follow on. I would like to give this to your staff.
You can give it to
complaint.
All right.
With the Office of Accountability, nobody knows how to get to those people. Who is that? Office of Accountability?
Thank you. It's got kind of a lousy name anyway. Yes, sir. Thank you, Julie.
Hi, my name is Randy Bowker. And just because I tend to tell everybody this, I'm an ex-Navy bullhead. So, my question seems like small potatoes compared to all the major issues we're facing, but primarily it's that I've always grown up looking at like NASA as one of the things that provides a lot of hope and drive for our nation. And right now, at least the manned space program part of it is more like a jobs work program. We're building the SLS space launch system, and the rocket is so expensive that we can't afford to build anything for it to launch, except we are working on the crewed manned capsule, or I think it's Orion. But we can't actually afford to plan and set up for it to go anywhere. And this is the same problem we had with the shuttlecraft. Shuttle was awesome, but it wasn't what we hoped it would be. And it was so expensive to operate, we could only afford to operate it as a truck instead of an exploration vehicle. Now we're building an exploration vehicle, but we can't actually afford to explore with it. You know, they talk about, oh, it's going to send us to Mars. Maybe empty, right? But on the other hand, there are 3 different companies, one of them in Colorado, which are working on their own dime on heavy lift vehicles. And so, yeah, this seems ridiculous. NASA's supposed to be about exploring. You know, it's maintaining the drive that built this country. And instead, that seems to be dying.
Well, so I don't think this is a small thing at all. I think this is a big thing. And those of us that are, you know, you and I probably are about the same generation, who know how inspiring it was for us to see the Apollo missions and other missions going to the moon and what that meant for us growing up. You know, that's been lost for a lot of school kids in this country. And it's one of the reasons why I've worked with United Launch Alliance and some others to have programs on Saturday mornings where middle school kids can come and meet with actual rocket engineers and learn about what they do so that they get excited about it. We've done a terrible job in this country of making math and science as boring as we possibly can for kids in school. And when they apply it, it becomes exciting, and there's nothing more exciting than space. I don't know enough to be able to speak intelligently about the issues you raise with respect to the cost of the rockets and the lift. I know enough to know that it's embarrassing to me that the space shuttle program came to an end without America having any ability to put somebody in space. And we almost lost the Orion project here in Colorado. Ed Perlmutter and I fought the last administration to keep that going. That is the project to go to Mars. And I look forward to learning more about how we can do it more efficiently and more cheaply. There are people, as you know, around the country that are now engaged in work to do it in a cheaper way. And I think where we can, we should do it more cheaply. One of the... do you guys remember the week we had that horrible healthcare website rollout debacle, which we're still recovering from, which was not excusable to me, but the reality is the federal government, and this applies, I think, to NASA too, is terrible at IT, generally speaking, is terrible at procurement and terrible at customer service. And you add all that up and you get that website rollout. That weekend, my daughter Caroline and I went to see the movie Gravity that Sandra Bullock was in, and I don't know if all of you saw that, but she spends a lot of time rolling around in the space shuttle, and you watch her going through the manual trying to figure out what to do up there, and the blinking lights and everything is so clearly 1960s technology. I just sat there in the theater laughing because it's an extension of what I saw with that that website rollout. So let's talk more later about the specifics. But I do think that we can energize and hire the next generation of Americans with an approach towards space. And it's a reminder, too, that just denigrating the government is not going to mean that we get to fulfill the ambitions that prior generations of Americans have managed to fulfill, not just for themselves, but for their kids as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
So, next up is Raul Rodriguez, Jan Tapey, and Amanda Miller. Come on up.
Thanks for being
here. Good evening, Senator.
Good evening. I'm sorry, I feel underdressed.
And I want to thank you for all your help while you've been in the Senate, and I appreciate everything you do. But I haven't heard recently as to the status of what might be going on with immigration and what's going on, to the extent that you would know, on deportation. And whether in fact we can get those people that did such a good job on the Veterans Hospital to help the president out to build the wall.
So those are the folks you would want.
It would never get done, Senator. But anyway,
I just appreciate it's such an important issue, and it's a place where I think real violence is being done to our traditions right now. Along with these traditions, are the rule of law and separation of powers and freedom of the press and our history as a nation of immigrants. And some of you may know, probably some of you do, that I was part of the Gang of Eight that wrote the immigration bill in the Senate, 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans who spent 8 months together writing a bill that I think the American people would be reasonably proud of. And the process, for once in Washington, people sitting there actually solving problems. And that bill did have meaningful border security. And in fact, it's the only bill that's passed either House or the Senate that had any border security and some internal security. It also had a pathway to citizenship for the 11 million people that are here and are adopted. It also had an expedited pathway for people that were here working in our farms and our ranches. That was a provision that I wrote with Marco Rubio and Dianne Feinstein and Orrin Hatch. It was a really good bill. And it got 68 votes in the Senate. And if Paul Ryan had had the guts to do what the American people want them to do, it would have passed in the House of Representatives, and we wouldn't have had to go through the agony of what the Trump administration is doing on immigration and to immigrants in this country. I was in Aurora during the campaign at the Asian Pacific Islander Center, which is about a block off Colfax, not far from here. There are people from Bhutan and Japan and Nepal and places like that. And at the end of it, a woman got up who said, my parents were from India. They were doctors. They came to the United States. And I'm an American. I was born here. Just like the judge that Trump said couldn't decide his case because his parents were born in Mexico. And she said, Michael, I just want you to remember 2 things from this conversation. One, when you hear all this anti-Muslim talk, you guys think it's just about the Middle East, but our whole region of the world is filled with hundreds of millions of people that are hearing this, and they have no idea what the implication is for them. And she might have said, she didn't, for the war on terror, because a lot of these countries have been helping. And then the second thing she said was, I'm not Muslim, I'm Hindu. But I don't detect that these people are distinguishing between one brown person and another brown person. And when you consider what's happened to families who have been deported since Donald Trump has been president, it is astonishing what's happened. I had a meeting with Kelly, who's the Secretary of Homeland Security. He's a good guy. He's a quality person. But he said in the meeting, he said, well, we're focused on the real criminals. That's what we're going to do. And then in the course of the conversation, it became apparent that he was including in that category people who had come to this country on a lawful visa but had overstayed their visa. And I pointed out to him, that's 40% of the 11 million people that are here that are undocumented, and that's a bunch of the people that in our own community we've had. I started today on my way to Fort Collins, meeting in north of Denver. Where were we? Westminster or something? What? North Glen? With a guy who was arrested. Arturo is his name, Hernandez. He was arrested 2 weeks ago. He's been in our country, working in our country for 20 years. He's got a tile business. He's got one daughter who's an American citizen. She's born here. He's got another daughter who's a DACA student. He's got a wife who's undocumented and a father-in-law who's an American citizen. He lives in a house, a trailer that, he has completely refurbished himself because he has the skills to do it. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And he was arrested for no reason at his place of business and put in the Aurora detention facility, and they said they were going to send him back to Mexico a week before his daughter was supposed to graduate from North Glen High School. And Perlmutter wrote a private bill, and I wrote a private bill, and ICE, has now decided not to do that, but it shouldn't come to that. We should have a set of priorities. Mayor Hancock, I don't think you would mind my saying this, called me earlier this week to say, and I used to work for the city and county of Denver for a guy named John Hickenlooper. I have no idea what happened to him. But I think he lives in Park Hill somewhere. But Michael Hancock called me and he said, I've got a call from the city attorney's office, and we have people that will not show up to testify in domestic abuse cases because ICE is arresting people in the courthouse. They shouldn't be arresting people in the courthouse or in a church or in a school. And I tell you, this young lady today who graduated from North Glen, I walked into the house and the first thing I saw was her diploma sitting there on the table. I asked her, I said, are there a lot of other kids that are in the same situation you're in at your school? And she said, I don't know. And there's a reason some people don't know, because you don't want to talk about it. She said, I don't know. But what happened to me on graduation day was another girl came up to me and said how glad she was that my dad was out of prison and could come see my graduation. And then she said, but she told me that both of her parents had been deported the month before.
Well, Senator, I hope I can get out of this great institution without having to be deported.
That's what we're dealing with.
I've been here since I was born. My parents came here from Mexico, and this is the greatest country on the planet. But we've got to care a little more for one another than we do.
Well, and that I think is the most important point. So sometimes people say, what can you do? What politician can you do? What can you... During the whole campaign, when I traveled around, I said one thing that turned out to be untrue and another thing that I still believe is true. The thing I said that turned out to be untrue was that nobody this anti-immigrant could be elected president of the United States. That was wrong. That was wrong. But what I said that was true is that in a moment like this, it is up to all of us, not just people in the Senate. It's up to all of us to put our hands on someone else's shoulder and say, we're glad you're here. We hope you'll come back to our church on Sunday. We appreciate the work that you're doing in our fields or in our factories or cleaning that hotel. We're glad that you're a student at DU or at CSU. Do you know that I met with the engineering graduate students at DU a month ago or so, and 20% of the applicants to that school are Iranian. And I met with the Iranian students, and we have now barred them from the United States of America because they're refugee ban. I met with the Muslim leadership in Fort Collins. 90% of the people in northern Colorado who are Muslim are students here. And what they're going to do as a result of this, if we don't figure it out, is they're going to go to Canada and they're going to go to New Zealand, and we're not going to have the benefit of their talent. I've told folks around Colorado that there isn't anybody I've met. I've traveled every inch of our state over and over again. It's joy, because it's the most beautiful state in the country, and it's like being on vacation all the time. And I have yet to meet a person in this state that has a thicker accent than my grandparents had, not just when they came to America, but when they died in America as American citizens. And they were Polish Jews like my mom, who survived the Holocaust miraculously, and after the war was over, made it to Sweden, made it to Mexico City, and made it to New York City. My mom was the only person in her family who could speak any English. She enrolled herself in the public schools in New York City. That's America. And we need to embrace it, and we have got to reject the rhetoric that's coming out of this administration. And you need to let people know that you care about it.
Thank you so very much.
Okay, time for about 2 more questions.
Let's do a little more. Why don't we take
Dan's
5
not
more
here.
questions?
Okay.
Can we do 5 more? And then everybody's got to go live their lives. Not me, but you go.
My name
Can I, since I'm in this church, let me just say one other thing on this immigration stuff. Sorry, it's on my mind. I spent, about 3 weeks ago, I went to Jordan and visited a Syrian refugee camp there, which is now the 4th largest city in Jordan. There are 1.5 million refugees in Jordan, another 1.5 million refugees in Lebanon, where I also went. And in this camp, where you basically have people living in storage containers, human beings living in storage containers, who have fled the violence of an 8-year war now in Syria. These are women and children, by and large, in these places. And this country's current position is that we have banned them from being able to be in the refugee program in the United States of America. That is totally at war with who we are as Americans, and we need to change that as well.
My name's Amanda Miller. My question tonight is on Senate Bill 534, which I know isn't one that's gotten a lot of publicity. It's Senator Feinstein's bill, the Protecting Young Victims of Sexual Abuse Act. It was brought on by the current scandal with USA Gymnastics, where it was discovered that they were deciding for themselves whether reports of potential abuse were worth reporting to the FBI or other organizations, sometimes allowing for serial abuse to take place as people went from gym to gym. They're the most recent sport organization. They're not the first or the only one. This bill would require national governing sport bodies, as recognized by the USOC, to report abuse automatically and to educate their professionals in recognizing sexual abuse. A quarter of the Senate has now signed on as co-sponsors. You have not.
Okay. I appreciate you raising it. I've not read it, nor have I ever heard of it. So I will. We're making a note. Julie's making a note, and I'll. If you give her your contact information, we'll call you back next week.
Great. That would be wonderful.
Thank you very much for raising it. Appreciate it.
Good evening, Senator Bennet. I'm not really Jan Tapey. I'm Frank Tapey, but her name was called again, and she sent me up, and she's the boss. So I'm going to ask her.
You're no fool. It's nice to see you.
I'd like to ask you to make some comments about the possible connection between the Trump administration and Russia.
I appreciate it. So let me just, first, before I get into the latest, and I don't know, if, you can't turn it around for 10 minutes without, it's going to drive us all crazy. Before that, let me just say, as the campaign was going on last year, summer in particular, and Donald Trump started to say these really strange things, like, well, so what if Putin and I are friends? Why wouldn't that be a good thing? And he began to denigrate the European Union and talk about how NATO was obsolete. I found it just absolutely shocking from the point of view of our national security and the national security of our allies. This is actually connected, believe it or not, to what I was just talking about. Because we know now, most of us do anyway, and if you don't know, let me let you in on some real news, that the Russians meddled mightily in this election. Mightily. Donald Trump still says maybe it was the Chinese. There is not an intelligence agency in America that believes that. Intelligence agencies in America believe it was the Russians. We also know the Russians meddled in the European elections. We also know that probably Putin isn't going to invade a Western European country. I hope that he won't invade a Western European country. But the politics in Europe are very fragile right now. And they're partly fragile, when I say it's connected, because of what has happened in Syria and because of all the migration that's occurred as a result of that. And guess what? It wasn't all by accident. Vladimir Putin has done a lot of damage in Syria and created a lot of refugees. And you notice he's not letting any of them come to the Balkan states. They're all going into Western Europe where it's changing the politics because people worry about changes that are happening. And Putin is financing these right-wing groups in Europe. We know all of that. And to have an American president in the face of that say, NATO is obsolete, the European Union doesn't matter, is ridiculous. It is an invitation to the Russians to do things that we don't want them to do. And it's an invitation to jeopardize, as I said, our national security. After my trip to Jordan, I went to Germany to visit some of our soldiers from the 4th Infantry Division from Fort Carson, who are going up and down the border of, Poland and Russia to make sure that Russia knows we're serious about this. And these kids are deadly serious about it. And still we have a president who says this crazy stuff. Now, I'm not going to suggest what his motivation is. I'm just going to say he shouldn't be saying that stuff. He should be saying NATO are our strongest allies. He should be saying we support the EU. He should not be playing in politics that breaks up the European Union, because that would be catastrophic for Europe, for freedom, and for us. Now, on this latest stuff, today the president is reported to have said, this is not from a Comey memo, this is not from one of those contemporaneous memos, this is from, I think, State Department personnel. He is reported to have said to the Russians who were in his office the other day, the day after he fired the FBI, the head of the FBI, who was leading the investigation into the connection between the Trump campaign, if there is one, and the Russian meddling in our campaign, which is indisputable that it happened. The day after that, he met with the ambassador from Russia, who's the subject of the investigation, because Trump's folks, including his former national security advisor, met with him probably inappropriately during the course of the campaign. Now, can you imagine if President Obama had done any of that stuff? And now, and it's a reflection of the double standard that we have here, and we've got to apply not a double standard, but an American standard. And now he's reported to have said to these Russians, while they're in the White House, that he says, he notes that he fired the FBI director. He called him what do you call him? A nut job. Called him a nut job, and then said, I was under a lot of pressure from that Russia investigation. I'm not under that pressure anymore. That is ridiculous. And we need to get to the bottom of it, and we should. So I am extremely glad that Rod Rosenstein, who's the Deputy Attorney General, appointed a special counsel. It happened much faster than I thought it ever would. I think the reason it did was the president couldn't stop saying things that were ridiculous about what had happened, and the DOJ was left with no choice but to make that appointment, and they picked an excellent person to do this investigation. And now we should let the investigation go forward, and we should follow the evidence and see what we learn. The congressional investigations are still going to go forward, as they should, because there's criminal investigation happening in the DOJ stuff, potentially, but we've got counterintelligence concerns and other kinds of concerns that might not be picked up in that investigation, but are of great concern to us, or should be of great concern to us as a country. Follow the money. We've heard that before. So that's what I would say, Frank. I'm discouraged by it because I think there's such a reflection in the record here that there's such a low regard for the rule of law. You know, whether it's attacking judges who disagree with him or attacking the free press, having conversations with, and when we know, you're talking about venerable institutions in the United States that have delivered journalistic excellence forever as fake news, and then relying on stuff that might be Russian propaganda very easily on the internet. We need to call the question on this. We really do. And for those, are there any teachers in the room? I mean, so I spend a lot of time with middle school kids and high school kids, and I tell them now I'm doing stuff I never thought I would have to do, but we have discussions about real news versus fake news, edited content versus not edited content, curated material versus non-curated material, and the need for students to be able to distinguish between stuff that's edited and stuff that's just somebody shooting their mouth off on the internet, whether it's a Russian troll or not. And they seem to understand the distinction. And that would seem to be a useful standard to apply to our politicians in Washington, including our commander-in-chief. The middle school standard. Thanks, Frank, for asking.
Thank you, Senator.
2 or 3? 3. All right, then everybody needs to go home.
Okay, so we have Eleanor Roberts, Julia Edelstein, and Graham Ray. If you can please come on up.
Bye, guys. We may have driven them away.
I know. I'll keep going.
Are any of you guys here?
So that's Graham Ray, Julia Edelstein, and Eleanor Roberts.
Why don't you call 2 more, unless that's Eleanor Roberts.
Well, so mine was what you just answered, but I want a more specific. Do you think there's a time frame? Do you think? I mean, I'm thrilled that Mueller is in charge. As you said, he seems like he was agreed to pick. But do you think we'll really be able to get to the bottom of this soon? Do you think before the next set of elections?
Well, I do think we will get to the bottom of it, and I think that if there's anybody who can do it, it's Bob Mueller. I think it's impossible to know, to be able to predict when it's going to happen. And there have been some people who have said, I've gotten contacted in my office, well, why haven't you already impeached the guy? Or why haven't you? Well, look, there's a process in place, and I'm not interested in violating the rule of law any more than I am in Donald Trump violating the rule of law. And so we have to take the time to do it right. And it's important to remember that Republicans are the majorities in the Senate and in the House. And just as with Watergate and Richard Nixon, when we needed Republicans to stand up and help save the Union, we may need them to do it again. I'm not, look, even before I get to the question Frank asked about the Russians and collusion and all of that kind of stuff, there's a whole host, and I'm worried about it, and we need to get to the bottom, and I really want to know. There are a whole series of other things, like the immigration thing we were talking about earlier, like North Korea, like healthcare, that are things we have to continue to work on even when this other stuff is going on, because the American people need us to do it. All right.
Independent commission?
I would love to have an independent commission, but let's see how this goes.
Is there an imbalance between the three branches of our government? And if so, what can be done about it?
Such a great question. Is there an imbalance between the three balance government, and what can we do about it? I think that let me give you my two biggest concerns. I believe that Congress is paralyzed. And I believe that Congress is paralyzed because of the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United and the effect of and the court, I'm not going to, because it's late at night and I don't want to bore everybody to death, but let me just say that the court, I've said all over Colorado that I thought that reading the majority opinion to Citizens United was like reading a seventh grader's report on American government. And now I've decided that's an insult to seventh graders, so I don't say it. But they fundamentally didn't understand what goes on, and what they basically came down to in that opinion was a question of whether, we needed campaign finance rules to regulate what they called quid pro quo corruption, which is a world in which Nate gives me $5,000 and I go write a bill for Nate. That's what they thought of as quid pro quo corruption. And they said, no, we have other laws that punish that and make it illegal, and so we don't need to erode on the rights of the Koch brothers to give as much money as they want to super PACs, and so are we worried about the appearance of corruption, they said. And they said, no, we're not worried about that. In democracy, you can never have enough speech. I mean, I've yet to meet a Coloradan who has said to me the problem with our politics is that there's not enough money in it. Not one. But that's the Supreme Court's position. And what they missed, much more important than anything I just said, is that it's not about an appearance of corruption. The place is corrupt. But it's not quid pro quo corruption. It's not a corruption of action. It's a corruption of inaction. It's bills that aren't introduced and speeches that aren't given and committee hearings that aren't held because people are so freaked out that some super PAC's going to drop $30 million on their head in the next election. You want to know why we've been the least productive Congress in modern American history? That's the reason why. And it's disabled the Congress to a degree, and I think that's one reason why I worry about the balance of power. A second reason I worry about it is the attack of this president on our judiciary and an attack on the independent judiciary. And I know there was a lot of concern with me among a lot of people when I said that I thought that the Democrats were making a mistake by filibustering Neil Gorsuch. I still feel that way. I think we made a terrible mistake. But I didn't vote for him in the end, but I think filibustering a qualified nominee for the court played right into Mitch McConnell's hands and allowed him to invoke the nuclear option to blow up the Senate. And now, I've said, if you don't like the ring of Justice Gorsuch, how do you like the ring of Justice Pruitt? Who doesn't believe that climate change is real and runs the EPA? How do you like the ring of Justice Sessions? How do you like the ring of Justice Betsy DeVos? Because he could appoint any of those people and get them approved with 51 votes because Democrats are out of powder now. And I'm not saying McConnell wouldn't have done it anyway, and we would maybe. But we didn't try very hard to try to preserve the checks and balances of the Senate in that context. And the reason I worry that it's going to diminish the court is that, and some people here may say I'm naive, and I accept your criticism, but I think it's a positive thing that judges nominated to the Supreme Court at least try to make themselves into somebody who's more middle of the road. And the proponents of those people try to say, oh, no, you should focus because they're an open-minded person, they're middle of the road. And sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't. You know, we've had experiences with both. But where we are today, because of what we did, not us, but, you know, collectively, not what you did, what we did, is we're in a place where I am worried that the next justice that will be nominated by the Republicans will be somebody who can claim to be the most conservative judge in the world, because I only need 51 votes, and we should all vote for that person. And the next judge to be nominated by Democrats will be the most liberal judge in the world, and we will have infected... Yeah. Yay, Bernie! And we will have infected our court with the partisanship that now exists in our Congress. So we got to fix the money problem. We got to fix the partisanship problem. We got to deal with gerrymandering. And frankly, I think we just need to expect more and demand more of our elected officials. You know, there's a tendency in this country, you know, if you watch the cable news at night, to somehow believe that it's unnatural for us to have disagreements, or that it's unprincipled for us to have disagreements. We live in a democracy. Of course we're going to have disagreements. And the point, what the founders wanted us to do was they gave us a mechanism to resolve them. And they were very careful about it. I apologize. I'm going to go on for one more paragraph. I'm sorry about it. But this is another thing I've been saying to kids that come to Washington. And they sit there and they see the Capitol and the Lincoln Memorial, and you know, there's an impression that they've all just been there forever. And that our system of government has always been there forever. And, you know, it hasn't. And when you read the history of the founders, or the framers of our Constitution, it was amazing what those guys were doing. It was absolutely amazing. Ben Franklin famously was standing on the steps of Constitution Hall one day, and somebody came and they yelled at him and said, "Mr. Franklin, what government are you? What kind of government are you creating? A monarchy or a republic?" And his answer, some of you may know, was he shouted it back, and he said, "A republic if you can keep it. If you can keep it." And the amazing thing about that was these guys' model of government, the republic, had not really existed in name since the Roman Republic, since ancient Rome. There had been no humans who had collected themselves into something called a republic with a balance of powers, with the checks and balances that you're talking about, that we have. People had written about it, but no group of people as populous as the original colonies had been a republic. No geography as big as that small group of colonies had been a republic. And remember, those weren't even states back then. They were like different countries. They really were. When those guys came, the Virginians talked about Virginia as their country. And the folks from Massachusetts talked about Massachusetts as their country. Some of these people hated each other, by the way. And I think, when I think about this all the time when I'm with these kids, they would be staggered to know that the Constitution they wrote is still here 240 years later, that the republic they designed is still here 240 years later, that it goes from coast to coast, from the East Coast to the West Coast to Alaska and Hawaii, that we have the greatest military that the world has ever known, the most incredible, exceptional economy that human beings had ever had before. And what they'd be saying, I think, now is, can we keep it? And are we going to keep it? And I think, you know, when I get the calls that I'm getting every day, I know absolutely that we're going to be able to do it. I didn't sign up for this particular moment in our history, and a lot of you didn't either. But I think it's important on those of us that have the ability to be able to come together on a night like this, who aren't having to work a third shift or, you know, to make sure we're providing for the family or get ready to go to work tomorrow and Sunday, that we're doing everything we can to get us through this period. And I believe we will. And we need some folks in this country that are willing to stand up for some of these institutions rather than just trash them all the time, which I think we've had too much of. So I'm sorry to go on for so long, but I so much appreciate the question, and it's an invitation to all of you to be as involved as you possibly can be, because I think that's going to make the difference. Well, how is, don't wait for the next election. You know, let's organize people now. And let's make sure we rally people now. And let's make sure that members of Congress, I know people in the Congress. Look, well, that's a stupid thing to say. Of course I do. By the way, I didn't tell you a story. I want to tell you one. Did I tell you that I mentioned my colleague from Texas earlier? No. So, yeah, I forgot to tell you a story on immigration. My friend left. But I mentioned to you that it took 8 months to negotiate that bill. And I have always said that when people say, you guys are terrible, there's no leadership in Washington, and we don't have any faith in any of you, said that I have faith in at least the work of John McCain, Jeff Flake, Marco Rubio, and Lindsey Graham, the 4 Republicans who negotiated that immigration bill, knowing exactly what the base of their party would say about them being there, but doing it because they knew it was the right thing to do for the country. And it's also true that it did take us 8 months, and we could have gotten it done in 4, but every single time we met, which was like 3 times a week, sometimes 4 times a week, we had to leave time at the beginning for John and Lindsay to talk about how much they hated Ted Cruz. And then, once we got through that, we could get on to the negotiation. You get the last word.
Hi, I'm Julia Edelstein. Thank you so much. I've come to respect you a lot since I downloaded the Countable app, and every single time I vote yay or nay on something, your face pops up, so I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
My question, I work for United Way and their call center, and we get calls all day long, individuals needing rental assistance and affordable housing, and there is none. And it's devastating to have to tell people over and over again, people who suffered horrible losses in their lives and just need a leg up, a little boost, that there's nothing for them. And so this is a little more of a local question, but we have such a housing crisis right now in Denver and Colorado, across the country. But what are you doing to help us have more affordable housing, have opportunities for
Well, let me say, first of all, thanks for what you do. And also, I know you guys have also been doing a lot of good work on immigration, too, because of 211. So thank you for doing that. I'm going to mention one thing, and then I'm going to answer your question. The thing I'm going to mention, because it did not come up today, is the significant job we do the next college degree or its equivalent are 9 and 100. That will not work. That will not work if you just happen. They're going to happen. Know that we have a long, long way to go. It's a school district that's in college 67% more kids this year than in 2005. 120% increase in Latino graduates since 2005. 60% increase in graduates. And I may not feel great about across the country, but I feel a lot better every school district say that we have so much more work to do. Now on your very important issue. I just last weekend read a book. I started it at the beginning of the weekend, finished it at the end of the weekend, called Fiction. And if you people, if anybody in here has not read it, it won the Pulitzer Prize. It is a book by a Harvard sociologist about housing in America, but particularly he had and lived in Milwaukee. He writes about the life of people churning through housing stock that's deteriorating every time they go and becoming more expensive every time they go. And if they have kids, it's even harder for them because a kid might do something wrong and it results in an eviction and somebody makes money on the eviction. This opened my, I worked, in the school district. I couldn't have imagined, maybe you have read Jonathan Kozel's book, There Are No Children. There is a huge amount of work we need to do in America's poorest community. And now, what is it we do here? And the cost of housing in Denver and Metro area has become and we're going to have to find a way to work together with the city and county to build more affordable housing, to provide more vouchers and other kinds of support for low-income people and middle-income people, and to do it in a way where they don't have to consume 30%, or I mean more than 30% of their income, to be able to just have the basic stability of a home. One of the things in that book that's kind of ignored is the effectiveness on students and young people. having to move from place to place to place to place. I've seen it in the Denver. There was a congressman who asked the other day, rhetorically, why should a 60-year-old man have to pay for maternity care? In a town hall. And with respect to everybody here, this little old lady went home and she didn't have an answer there, but she wrote it. She wrote him one later, and I want to read it to you because I think it underscores what you're talking about and what we all try to do. Barbara responded in her local newspaper. I asked, in response to why should a 62-year-old man have to pay for maternity care, I asked, why should I pay for a bridge I don't cross, a sidewalk I don't walk on, a library book I don't read? Why should I pay for a flower I won't smell, a park I won't visit, or art I can't appreciate? Why should I pay for the salaries of politicians I don't vote for, a tax cut that doesn't affect me, or a loophole I can't take advantage of? It's called democracy, a civil society, a greater good. That's what we pay for. I could not agree more. Thank you, everybody.
Where do you want to do this? Back corner. Yeah. Let me go over here. I'll grab that. Thanks.
My dad's coming in the end of June.
Yeah, here's it. Just log off with Ingest. It should be the same time as your watch. Did it come down? Yeah, it's fine. I'm just letting you know that I was selective with how much limited memory I had. Sure. So I clicked on and off on some of the space stuff, the NASA stuff. Yeah. But I